thank you, Professor Hill, for hanging out and staying around, doing double duty tonight. Really appreciate it. Your voice is so important on this issue because you're still in Tulsa. And thank you, Pastor Turner, for your voice and the work that you've done, not just in Tulsa, but also in Baltimore, where you continue to lead the charge on reparations. But let me start with you, Karlos. What is the mood of the city? Take us to Tulsa. I saw this scathing op-ed that was written by one of the Black Wall Street Times editor-in-chief, just expressing the outrage and the emotion. So talk to us about what the community in Tulsa is feeling right now.
Well, Areva, thank you again for having me in the second hour. You know how much I love Greenwood, how much I love the community. I can't say how the community as a whole is feeling, but I'm going to tell you how I feel. I'm going to tell you about how the people that I'm in support of in Tulsa would feel. It's deflated. You know, this has been 103-year long struggle for justice, and no justice for any victim, descendant, or survivor connected to the massacre. The deadliest attack on a Black community has happened, although whites, particularly white store owners, have received restitution. And so it's the injustice in Greenwood and Tulsa is so glaring, so even unprecedented, that the deadliest attack on a Black community, white individuals, white businesses even receive restitution. And the last two survivors, we actually have survivors of the incident, right? And we, in Oklahoma law, a public nuisance law that's supposed to be about compassion, we don't have compassion for the deadliest attack on a Black community and the two remaining survivors, right? And so there's a sense of deflation, but that's not the end of the story. And I would gladly talk about the things that I think might happen, but I know Pastor Turner, who I love and respect, has much more to say about what the community would be feeling.
Yeah, thank you for that, Karlos. Deflated, I think, is a good word. Pastor Turner, what are you feeling, or what did you feel? You know, what were your initial reactions when you got the news about how the court had ruled?
It was stunning. Areva, first of all, thank you again for having me back, and always a pleasure to be in the midst of Dr. Karlos Hill, a great scholar and friend. When I was the pastor at Vernon, I was the one who reached out to Attorney Simmons to try to represent the church because we still had standing. And so Vernon was the original plaintiff in the lawsuit. And they, after I left, they took us off as the plaintiff. The defense objected to us being a plaintiff, and the judge upheld that. And every so often they would take off plaintiffs, and for them to be the last two, the survivors, to be left as plaintiffs, and to see what their Supreme Court, because those plaintiffs live still in Oklahoma, and to see what their Supreme Court did to them, it's an embarrassment to what we call a just and civil society, that you could have a society where airplanes were used to drop bombs on American soil. Nobody goes to jail. And at the same time, this country is sending money overseas to help other folks defend themselves, such as the Ukrainians, to defend themselves against the Russians dropping bombs on their soil. So we can have money to support, and we don't mind supporting them, but we can't even do justice in our own backyard. It's a glaring example of the hypocrisy of our unjust system and society. And we have the two oldest survivors left, and they will not they unfortunately will not receive justice from their own state as far as this lawsuit is concerned. It's very troubling.
Yeah, so the court noted, Professor Hill, and you're there in Tulsa, it said the continuing blight alleged within the Greenwood community born out of the massacre implicates generational society inequities that can only be resolved by policymakers. That's such a deep statement. That statement is what we hear repeated so often. And to break that down, I mean, it's a lot of big words to basically say, the folks that did that ain't here now, so why should we pay for what they did? I mean, and that's what we often hear when you talk about reparations. I just posted something on my own social media page about Palm Springs. I did an interview, the case I'm working on in California, and someone went on my page and wrote a comment and said, oh, that happened 60 years ago. Everybody's dead. You know, why should we be responsible? And that's what the court is basically saying. Yeah, Black folks are living in poverty. There's blight in Tulsa, and it might be related. We know it is related, but they're saying, you know, we're not responsible for that. The government really shouldn't be responsible for that. Help us understand how that argument gets used whenever we're talking about repairing harm done to Black folks. Don't hear that same argument, though, when others have been successful in seeking and, obtaining reparations.
It's Black harm. We have a statute of limitations. When it's Black harm, it's personalized. It's got to be connected directly to you as a victim. We got to be able to prove you are a victim. It becomes legalistic. And in legal courts, we don't win. We just don't win in courts, because by the time our claims can get to court, they will say statute of limitations. And so, but when it comes to other people's harm happening to them, racial violence happening, or just, things, acts of nature, happening, those things are seen as institutional violence, right? And institutional violence gets treated differently, right? And the problem for us is that the Greenwood as a community was destroyed. An institution was destroyed. Greenwood was destroyed, but miraculously rebuilt itself without the support, the help of the state or the city. And so when we talk about the harm that was done, it's not just the survivors. We need justice for the two survivors, but Greenwood as a community is a survivor too. As an institution, it survived without the support and help of the city. And so what we're talking about is this same community that deserves repair as an institution. The city has not found the compassion for it or the survivors. And so that's where we are, like fighting against the indifference and the lack of compassion for the community and the survivors.
And one of the things, Pastor Turner, and again, this is a statement from some of the local officials in Tulsa, which you know, because you were there pastoring a church. State and local officials argue that while the massacre was horrific, they should not be held accountable for events that happened decades ago, over 2 days in 1921. We just hear that argument over and over again. Again, not just in the Tulsa case, and reparations actions and efforts all over this country, this notion that somehow somebody else is responsible and that somebody else is dead. The one-sidedness of that argument, not ever recognizing that those that benefit from those racial atrocities are still living today and reaping the benefits. No recognition that the wealth that white communities have been able to build is because of land oftentimes that was stolen by blacks and opportunities that were stolen from blacks. So nobody ever talks about, well, I shouldn't have these benefits today because, you know, they were taken illegally or they were gained illegally by my ancestors decades ago. So it's such a one-sided argument, but we hear it over and over again. And a lot of people believe that it has legitimacy and it sounds good on its face. Well, why should I pay for something that I didn't do? How do you respond when people make that argument to you?
Well, because the person that actually did it still exists, right? And they're allowed to go on still exists. The city of Tulsa still exists. The city of Tulsa that largely saw and was at worst complicit, at best a conspirator, an actor in the worst massacre in American history. The Tulsa Fire Department still exists. That didn't put out one fire. In fact, documented eyewitness reports state they watched the houses and churches be burned to the ground. Sinclair Oil Company, the company whose airplanes were used to drop incendiary devices on churches' homes that destroyed 1,256 homes in 18 hours, they still exist to this very day. So those actors are still present. So they are still there. The problem.
Hold that thought for me, Pastor Turner. I definitely want to get into that because that's a myth, as you said, that these folks aren't still around because they are